everyone, I'm Lindsey Moppert here with Vic Carucci. Vic, we're trying to make this a weekly thing here, you and I, discussing, even in the off season, some Bills topics. And honestly, we're not too far away from the start of it all. I think, maybe 19, 20 days, something like that. So let's get right into it. The most recent thing that has kind of popped up in the Bills media, you could call it. Josh Allen was on the podcast Bussin' with the Boys. That's a whole nother topic. But and he was talking about when they asked him about the Diggs situation and kind of his take behind that. He said that the media blew it up way more than it should have been. But when we're looking at it and Sean McDermott, the head coach, says that he's very concerned, I mean, that has to be something that question marks come up about. So what were your thoughts on that when he said that?
Yeah, nice try, Josh. I mean, obviously he is trying to deflect, and that is what you're supposed to do when there is a bit of controversy in your midst. And that's exactly what he tried to do. But it's better to blame the media, where you have more support, I think, from your fan base, because everybody hates what we do, then blame the head coach who just got a contract extension, right? Because really, Sean McDermott was the cause of all the fury, not the media. The media was merely reporting what the head coach said. And if Sean handles it any other way, other than what he did, it is a nothing story, but it became one. Sean made it one. Josh had a lot to say about it when it first happened, so he helped fuel that. And to his credit, he answered a lot of questions about it. Now he wants it to go away. I don't blame him, but the media is not the cause of an issue that's inside the team.
Right. And like you said, that's what he's supposed to do. Obviously, you don't want the entire league talking about your team's drama, right? So it makes sense, definitely. But interesting, to say the least. The next topic that I want to talk about with you is specifically the competition for that other cornerback spot aside from Trey White. So you've got a guy with a little bit more experience, Dane Jackson. Okay, then you've got last year's first round pick, Kaiir Elam. Now, you would think that's the guy, right, that they want to have that spot, but there might be some competition there with Christian Benford. So where do you take on that? And you and I have talked about this, about Kaiir's, how he performed last season. And I know you feel a certain way about that. So go ahead and take us through that.
Well, I think it's admirable that the Bills don't attach the round that you were drafted as the reason you need to be starting. However, if it's up to the Bills and not the competition to put in who they'd like to see in there, it would be Kaiir Elam. He's the first round guy. You invested a high pick in him. You want to see him on the field more than less. But after a shaky rookie season, there's still questions about whether he should be the starter. And you have Christian Benford competing, a 6th round pick competing. And Christian, of course, has that extra ability to play inside as well as corner. But then there is the experience of Dane Jackson. And really the safe way to go might be just that. This is going to be a fun competition, I think, to watch throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, and maybe even into the season before we really know what the Bills are going to do there. I think they might just stay with Dane Jackson into the year, watch what Kaiir Elam does, and see if he can progress enough to finally put him in there, trust him to put him in there. But hey, they face a lot of good passing teams in their division in the AFC. So it'll be interesting to see if they reach a point where Kaiir Elam can be the full-time guy opposite Tre'Davious White.
Right now, talking a little bit more about Tre'Davious White, obviously he comes back last season after an ACL injury. As you would expect, it's going to take a guy a little bit of time to kind of get back into his groove and get back into routine. Now he's had a bit of a quiet, it seems like, off season, maybe, just trying again to get back into that groove. What kind of year do you predict that he will have for the Bills this upcoming season?
The hopeful part of Tre'Davious White's situation is that generally speaking, the recovery from a torn ACL is better in year 2 than year 1 after the injury. So there is that. But Tre'Davious White has to show what he used to be, which was an outstanding cornerback, one of the best in the league when he was fully healthy prior to that injury. And we really haven't seen that guy. We didn't see him through the time after he came back from it. And look, it's hard to get into a guy's head. He also seemed very bothered, as so many of his teammates were, as players around the league were, by the whole Damar Hamlin situation. It really affected him emotionally. It's hard to forget his reaction to that, not only visibly on the field, but some of the things he was saying when he met with reporters the few times that he's really spoken with any media. And he's made himself pretty well off limits on there. So it's hard to tell what he's thinking about because there's just no access to him. The coaches, Sean McDermott, others, talk it up and say that he is working hard, showing all the effort he needs to show to get back there. But really, this is not about effort. This is just about how he feels physically, maybe mentally, to get back to the Tre'Davious White he once was.
Absolutely. And that was another thing that Josh talked about a bit on that podcast, as I mentioned earlier, was just, even as you mentioned, across the league, how that situation kind of affected players. But when you were on the field during that moment, surely something that none of us at least can relate to. So lastly, just shifting gears a little bit now, I want to talk about receivers and specifically Gabe Davis's role this upcoming season. We've talked about this before. We've heard Brandon Beane have his back. We've heard several different things, hardest working guy in the locker room, always staying after. But as we talked about in our last discussion on here about Trent Sherfield and how he's catching the attention of, his quarterback without Diggs being there, getting some more catches and stuff like that. And then another guy who, his role is yet to be known exactly, Dalton Kincaid, obviously. How do you see or what do you see Gabe Davis's role being this year, or what does he have to do to be one of those top guys?
The good news for Gabe Davis is that the Bills haven't been highly aggressive in pursuing a replacement. That isn't to say that they don't have new people aboard who could challenge him. Trent Sherfield definitely is somebody who could. And then drafting Dalton Kincaid, who is sort of half tight end, half receiver, that might be a place where Gabe Davis will lose some snaps and some opportunities, targets to catch the ball. But really, it looks like the Bills have just put the ball in his court to say, show us that you can be everything we need you to be as a number 2 guy, at least for now. And yes, the DeAndre Hopkins possibility still hangs in the balance until he ends up somewhere other than Buffalo. He could still end up in Buffalo very late in the preseason process or right before the season, if that's when he decides that his money demand goes way down from what it apparently would be right now. But short of that, I think it's Gabe Davis's job to lose, and he's got an opportunity to show that he can consistently be what the Bills need him to be, but there will be competition.
Right. And that, honestly, we could go deep dive into that and all the receiver stuff. But that's about all we're going to get to today. Again, Vic, we're going to make this a weekly thing, especially with training camp kind of creeping up on us. So thank you very much for joining me, and we will see you guys next time.